Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, clinical psychologist.
And I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, so we ready for this?
I think we are.
I think today is going to be empowering, we'll say.
I hope so. For those of you who watch our video clips, we're recording right after the last one, so that's why we're in the same clothes, looking the same way.
Yeah, exactly. We got to do this when we can find time,
yes.
And dedicate what we can to, having a good recording time. So, anything else new going on?
Anything else new? Well, still no snow, which
No.
I'm glad. I'm glad for, because I didn't want to have to dig my car out in the morning to go to work.
Does your development clean up pretty well, or?
Hit or miss. They're not very timely with it. Like, it'll get cleaned up eventually, but like if it snowed overnight, I would probably still have to like fully dig my car out, and the parking lot would be bad. So
no fun.
Yeah. Eventually I'll get my own house and then just hire somebody to do that stuff.
It's not any easier. I mean, I've done it both ways.
Yeah.
When we lived in a townhouse, like I remember this is probably 2010 or probably 10 or 9, somewhere around there. We had so much snow, and the way that our units were, our doors and our garages were all in like a courtyard, and the drifts were literally like 5 feet high. And the development didn't have enough open space for them to like put the snow. So they had to like take some of the snow off property to dump it because there was just nowhere they could pile it any higher along the streets. I was literally stuck in Mass. I had to take a picture of my boss. Like, I know the rest of the world is clear, but I physically cannot leave my garage or my development. Like Route 35, clear. I could see it, but I can't get out.
I don't think you've been to my complex, but I essentially live in like a cul-de-sac. So sometimes they'll like pile it up like kind of adjacent to where my door is. Like, it won't be blocking anybody's door, but like there'll be like 17-foot pile of snow like by the mailbox.
Yeah. It doesn't get any better. I mean, I live on a cul-de-sac that they don't care about salting or plowing. So good luck to us, because we're like the last people on their list.
Well, at least for me, if God forbid I was snowed in, knock on wood, that won't happen. Like, essentially I could see all of my patients by telehealth, but you don't always have that.
But then the patients are going to come in anyway. I mean, my patients it's not an emergency, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to come in if it's that bad anyway. Anyway. Well, I would like one good snow. If the kids build a snowman, I can have some hot chocolate with some peanut butter whiskey in it, because that's
Guess
really
what? You can
good.
do that when it's not snowing. You can just do it when it's cold.
But it's just, like at the fireplace, read a book. I just want that snug thing.
Yeah. Speaking of peanut butter whiskey, we talked a couple weeks ago about how I went to Nashville, and I went to a distillery there, Tennessee Legend Distillery.
Okay.
And they have all different kinds of flavored moonshines and whiskeys and stuff, and they had a really nice peanut butter whiskey. I've had like other ones, but theirs was pretty good too.
Yeah, it's yummy. What's funny is I'm currently watching Married at First Sight, the season that they're in Nashville. So I'm seeing they use all these venues there, and they did like a whole moonshine tasting and things like that.
Place, yeah.
Nice. All right. Are we ready to get going?
I think we are. I think I'm up first.
Yes.
So my cocktail I'll start off with is called Shades of Pink. So here's, you can kind of see it. Not so many shades anymore. Now all pink.
It's pretty.
But it is 1.5 ounces of Empress 1908 Elderflower Rose Gin split. I didn't have that one, but I used another pink gin, again, split. So you use part of it in one part of it in the other part of the recipe. 1 ounce lemon juice, 1 ounce simple syrup, soda water, and then a lemon wheel and lavender sprigs for a garnish, which, as you can see, I had neither of. So you shake 0.5 ounces of gin, lemon juice, and simple syrup on ice, strain into a Collins glass over fresh ice, top with soda, leaving room to float the remaining 1 ounce of gin. So that's supposed to start off dark at the top and then fade, but like that happens almost right after you pour it.
You have to like video it as it's happening.
I tried. I couldn't catch it fast enough. I also think maybe the gin that I used wasn't dark enough because I know that the Empress elderflower gin is much darker than the one that I had.
Got it.
But either way, sounds delicious. This one tastes pretty good. So that's the cocktail. And then today I'm going to be talking about something that's both a book and a Netflix series. I read the book and I watched the series. It's called The Power by Naomi Alderman. Have you read that or watched that show?
I have not.
Okay, so the book I'll start off with, it was written in 2016 by British writer Naomi Alderman. It's considered a science fiction novel. And basically the premise is at some point in the near future, women begin to develop powers. Specifically, they grow or it's not 100% clear, but basically there's an organ in women that's been dormant. And then all of a sudden, teenage girls, their organs all at the same time become active and they can shoot electricity out of their fingertips.
Ooh, fancy.
It's very cool. So the novel itself follows several women and girls across the world who have now gained this power and how they decide to use that power. In this book, there's a lot of different themes I'm going to go over, but essentially the power is found very quickly right after women start electrocuting things or causing electrical malfunctions, causing fires. Very soon after, they find that there is an electricity generating organ called the skein, which runs right here, right underneath the collarbone, and found in the Wikipedia, it says almost exclusively found in women. In the book and in the show, it's exclusively in women, except for one person, which we'll get to at the end. But it is a female organ, which generates electricity throughout women's bodies. And it seems like the majority of the times they showed it's either coming out through fingertips or through their feet. So it runs through your whole body. And so there are 5 main characters in the book. One is Roxy. She is British. She's the daughter of a gangster. Then there is Tunde, sorry, that's the correct pronunciation. He is an aspiring Nigerian journalist who starts to film women using their power and kind of using it to start his journalism career. Then there is Margot. She's the mayor of, I believe it's supposed to be in Oklahoma. It doesn't say it in the Wikipedia page, but I remember in the book, it's supposed to be one of the middle states. She is middle-ish states. She is supposed to be the mayor of a major town. And then also follows Jocelyn, her daughter, who has the power. Finally, the other main character is Allie, who is a foster child who develops the power and originally uses it against an abusive foster parent. So in the book, all of these women all over the world are developing these powers, and it's kind of like, what do they decide to do with it? So Allie, she is one of the first people that you see in the movie and the book kind of weaponizing her power. So they don't really go too much into detail, but she's been in the foster system forever. Her mother essentially abandoned her. We don't really know the whole backstory, but she is being sexually abused by her foster father, and she knows that her foster mother is aware of it. And so she tries to get away, she tries to avoid it, but it keeps happening. And so one day she just gets overwhelmed with rage when it's happening and she accidentally electrocutes and kills him. And then she runs away, she's trying to hide because she doesn't know exactly how she did it or why she did it. Well, she knows why. She doesn't know exactly how and like why, like the mechanics of doing it. But throughout the series, both the book and the TV series, which I say the book is more expansive. The TV series, it was supposed to kind of have a season 2. We don't know what's happening with that, but I'll get to that in a minute. Throughout both, Allie has a voice in her head that is a female voice that is essentially telling her what her power is, how to use it, kind of guide her through life because she has no structure otherwise. She has no protector. And so this voice is essentially a woman god, she calls it. She says that God is a woman. Cue the Ariana song.
I know.
And then she is thinking that this power is guiding her to salvation, essentially. And she goes back and forth throughout both the book and the movie. It's kind of unclear if she really believes in religion or if she's just using that to get other people to follow her, which I'll go into detail why that's important. But we kind of go back and forth about, well, is she crazy? Is it schizophrenia? Or is she being led by is it her intuition? Is it her conscience?
Spirit guide?
Exactly, a spirit guide. It's never truly defined, and I think that's purposeful. I think part of it, the book talks about a lot of feminine issues, and I think there's that old mystique of the feminine intuition. And so that's kind of what I was like assigning to the power, is that about at least this voice associated with Allie's power is that female intuition that we can't explain when we know something isn't right or we know something bad is going to happen. That it seems like men, if they do have, they don't speak about it. They don't talk about it, but it's almost expected of women to have this other sense, this third eye.
The mystique.
So then that's Allie. That's what's going on with her. You know what? I'm just going to cover each person, their whole story, because going back and forth the way it jumps between the book and the movie can get confusing. So Allie runs away after killing her abusive father, and she's homeless for a long time, traveling across the country, aimless. Literally at one point, her clothes are falling off of her, full of holes, ragged. She's barefoot. She collapses on the side of the road. And these women pick her up and take her to essentially a convent and to take care of her, to feed her, to nurse her back to health. And that is where she meets just a bunch of other girls at this convent. And she's like, well, that's kind of weird. But as we know, as you know, going to Catholic school and things like that, there's certain convents or certain sects of religion that do certain things. So some are, homes for girls, some are homes for boys, some focus on other issues. So that's what it comes across as this particular convent is looking to foster and care for women and girls. And the interesting part of that is we come to find out that the women who run this convent have actually essentially been excommunicated from the church because they're lesbians. Ooh. And we know that the religion that they're talking about, assumedly the Catholic religion, isn't always very supportive of those who are lesbian or gay or bisexual. And so it's kind of alluded to that that's why they left the church, but they never lost their faith. And so that's why they started this central convent that we then find out isn't a legit convent after all.
Huh.
So they are taking care of these women and girls, and we come to find out every single woman and girl there has the power.
Ooh.
So Allie kind of sees this as an opportunity to lead all of these other girls in understanding their power, because she feels that her power is connected to her intuition or to that voice. And so she starts almost showing off, creating miracles. So at one point, a bird dies in the convent and she picks it up and using her electrical charge brings it back to life. But because the nuns in the convent and the other girls don't know the power or understand how it works, they think that now she created a miracle and brought something back from the dead.
Or just a defibrillator.
Exactly. At another point, she is walking on water and apparently using her electricity to kind of hover above the water versus touching it. There's another point where she gets a bunch of other girls to join her in the water, and she baptizes them by electrocuting the water so they fall back into the water. And then she says that they're now cleansed.
Okay.
So she essentially starts running her own cult. That's what Allie's doing. That's what she's choosing to do with her power. And that's really what at the core of this book is about, is if women did have this power differential over men, what would they choose to do with that power? What would be positive? What would be negative?
Right.
So the other character, Roxy, her father is the head of a gang. She is considered an illegitimate daughter because the gang leader is married and has 3 other children. One of the other kids is within 6 months of age of Roxy, but it's known that she is his daughter. And so there's a lot of tension between the families, between Roxy and Roxy's mother and the father and his other family. At one point, Roxy goes to her brother's wedding, and you kind of really see how she is outcast, not just for being the illegitimate daughter, but for being the woman in the family, because all the other are boys. And so how she doesn't quite measure up and how she doesn't fit in. She's not as traditionally feminine as some of the other women, like at the wedding. She's more of like a punk rock girl. So, dark eyeliner smudged and wearing, like Converse with her dress. And she's a little non-traditional, but she's still female and she still wants to be treated as a female and presented, just not in the traditional way. And what she really wants more than anything is to be part of her father's gang. But they keep saying, no, because you're a girl, you can't be in it. So a bunch of things happen that help them understand that she's more than just a little girl. But the biggest thing that happens is her mother is killed in a brutal attack. And Roxy is hurt very, very badly during this attack. She goes to her family to ask for help and wants to hunt down the people that attacked her and her mother and killed her mother. We come to find out through the course of it that it was actually people hired by her father to get rid of her and to get rid of her mother because they were just causing too much drama with his other family. And so that is when Roxy decides to really harness her power and use it over her father, where she essentially scares him so much that he is exiled and she takes over the gang.
Ooh, badass.
There's different parts in the book where there's something about her dealing a special new drug called glitter that apparently enhances the power as well. That doesn't come up in the series though. So I'm
Okay.
just trying to talk about like the main threads that carry through both. And then so Roxy, she exiles her father, she takes over the gang, and then through the wonder of social media, she finds out about Allie, who's running this cult. And Allie convinces her to come join the cult and be her soldier. And she tells all of the girls in the cult that a soldier of God is coming to join them. And then Roxy shows up. And so far from what you've seen, Roxy and Allie are the two with the strongest powers. So now they've aligned and it's like, oh, what's going to happen?
Right.
That's kind of where the show ends. It progresses more in the book. I'll get to that in a minute, but in a minute. But those are those two. Then there is Margot. She is the mayor of a town, and she sees all this chaos all of a sudden coming into her town while at the same time trying to battle misogyny, sexism that is happening in the political system. There's, particular characters who are very sexist or not so nice to her, think because she's a woman, she has to dress a certain way and act a certain way and be nice and smile. And she kind of doesn't want to do that. She just wants to be herself. And she wants to be taken seriously as a woman in politics. And that's really hard for her. So she is trying to balance all of that while all of this chaos is happening in her town. Now, all of a sudden, there's fires, power outages, things like that. And then they come to find out about the power and how all of these teenage girls are causing this issue. And then she finds out that her daughter, Jocelyn, has the power. And so in an attempt to both understand the power for herself and get her teenage daughter to like her again, because it's the normal, mother-daughter teenage butting heads, she asked Jocelyn to give her the power. And this is where we find out that the skein, that organ, isn't all women, but it hasn't been until this time awakened. And so older women have it, but their organ needs to be
activated.
That's a good word. Activated by someone else. So younger women or women who have an active power need to essentially jolt the other women and enact their power for them.
Do we know what made all of the young ones happen to come into their power at once?
No. So that part isn't explained. They do talk about trying to do research on it. They find out when they try to remove the skein, women die. So it is vital to life for women. They think that it may be something about how puberty and hormones are changing. And I don't know if you're going to talk about that later on, but how women and girls are now getting their periods earlier and have more hormonal symptoms younger. So it might have something to do with that, but they don't fully deep dive into that.
Okay.
So now Margot has the power, Jocelyn has the power. And again, it's what they decide to do with it. So for Jocelyn, she feels like hers is completely uncontrolled and she doesn't know what to do with it. And she meets a bunch of other girls who know how to control it, but she does everything they say and she just really can't get a good handle on it. So she feels almost kind of like defective in her power. But then she sees when she gives the power to her mother, how her mother just becomes more confident and she doesn't give a damn anymore. And she's kind of, now like a badass bitch who's got this power. And she's really using her political power to advocate for these women and girls because things are not going well for the community of women and girls out there. Once it is in the news that this is an actual thing, this is a true power, it's not just made up. Now they're putting women in camps. They are not letting women go to school because they'll hurt the boys. They're really kind of just shutting everything down. They don't want women in groups talking to each other. So they're really trying to oppress women even further because now they have this power. And all the ladies are fighting on back. They're like, you think you're going to tell me what to do?
Too real, it follows what humans do when they're a little bit scared of and that's, a group of any kind.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I mean, putting them in camps, it's just very historically based in a lot of different things.
Yeah. And it just touches on a lot of things about how, even if we take out the gender piece, like you're saying, when something different or new comes around, there's a lot of fear around it. And there's a lot of shutting down the knowledge sharing and the acceptance and just saying like, no, we can't have this.
Right.
But I think in this show, it's particularly poignant that, in the book, it's particularly poignant that I feel like there's a gender role reversal where the men are afraid of the women now. And they really need to figure out what to do to stop it, where it's like, welcome to our world. We felt this way all the time. And there's this one really, really touching scene where Jocelyn is explaining to her mother, Margot, what it feels like to have the power before she's transferred it to her. And she said that, she can walk around with her head up. She doesn't constantly worry about what people think by her looks or by what she's wearing. She doesn't have to walk to her car with her keys through her fist, which I was like, girl, been there. Like she's not afraid to talk to a boy who she likes and afraid of what he'll do to her, or if other people call her a slut or things like that. So it's like she's got this literal physical power now and feels so good, but the whole world is freaking out about it. And it's like, wow, it's like we almost have everything there and then they're shutting it down on us again. So that's, I'm trying to think if anything else major happens with in the show. Margot then decides to, like, everybody's behind her. She's talking about these camps and how we need to shut them down and how there should be training facilities. So we don't want to get rid of the power. We want to train girls how to feel in control of it. And it's not even like to use it for something. It's just like if a girl like Jocelyn has this power and doesn't know what to do, let's find other girls who know how to do it and like mentor them. So kind of like, I don't know how to describe it.
Big sister, little sister program.
Essentially, yeah. But she's trying to make it a positive thing. Like women have the right to have the power, because there's a whole political campaign about sterilization of the power.
Oh, God.
Which, again, we could talk about that in many other ways. But talking about sterilization of power and how she's against that and how she thinks it's more of understanding the power, doing research, learning why some people have more than others and what to do with it and how to manage it and how to use it in positive, healthy ways. So she's at the end of the show, she is kind of in this now campaign to run for senator. And they're having a debate, which I don't even know if they have debates for senators like they do presidential debates, but in the show they do. And the jerk guy who's been sexist to her since the very beginning is her running mate, of course. And he's basically just trying to throw her under the bus, say everything terrible about her. And,
you mean her opponent?
Yes,
her opponent.
Sorry, I said
okay.
running mate.
I was
yes,
like, wait, why is he so mean if he's a running mate?
Thank you for the correction. So he's basically just really trying to rile her up. And at one point, he drops this bomb that Jocelyn, her daughter's boyfriend was sent away to a camp to get rid of the power. And so you may be asking, how does Jocelyn's boyfriend have the power?
Is it a transgender
No,
individual?
Jocelyn's boyfriend is intersex. So do you know much about intersex? I know our listeners may not.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a biologic thing that can happen in development. Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone is born intersex, they can be born with both parts of sets of organs, but usually not fully both all of the female organs and all the male organs.
Correct.
And typically at birth, it is decided which one to go with, usually based on physical development and then also how much of which reproductive system is fully intact, and then the other part is removed. But it is genetic, so it is something that someone lives with for the rest of their life.
Right.
At some point, an intersex child who has surgery and becomes a male may have difficulty with actually the functioning of their penis or their urethra. They could have other difficulties. They definitely have some hormonal changes because they do inside still have ovaries or still have female hormones, even if the ovaries are removed. There's other hormones come from lots of parts of your body. And then intersex is a whole different episode.
Right.
I wanted to cover that in this. I love that they talked about intersex and then that if someone is intersex, they could have the skein, but then present as a male, choose to be a male. And so there's a bunch of essentially hypocrisy about that and how, well, those people need to be sterilized and they need to be kept away in camp because they're not normal like everyone else. So again, issues that we've all heard and dealt with in different ways are represented in this book. So lots of stuff going on. So there are these two peripheral characters who I don't feel are quite peripheral because they were in the book, but they really made like full episodes about them in the movie. There's a woman in Moldova. Her name is Tatiana. And through a series of flashbacks, you find out that she had been a gymnast trying to get into the Olympics. And in that country at that time, the Olympic candidates were essentially at the end of the day chosen by the government. The government would watch them train and then decide, you're going to go. And it wasn't based on necessarily merit or ability. It was more of this choice. So she's, I believe, 15 and she's a wonderful gymnast, and all of these politicians come to watch her, and one decides he's going to marry her. She's not going to the Olympics.
Okay.
And you find out that her family is basically like pushing it because they're very poor. So they're like, well, if you marry, the president, then we'll be set for life. We'll have money. Your little sister will be taken care of. So she has a little sister as well. And so she essentially goes along with this to take care of her family. She marries this man that she doesn't care for, and he's quite gross. And it ends her Olympic career, which she's been working forever for. So she goes and she marries him to take care of the rest of her family. And then we skip forward to now there is political unrest in Moldova, and he's just really not running the country right. And she finds out about this power, and she wants to have the power. So Tatiana finds a staff member of the royal palace who has it, and it basically intimidates her into giving the power to her. And so then she essentially is trying to plot her way out of this terrible situation that she's stuck in. Long story short, she ends up killing her husband, the president, and resumes the head of government as the remaining, because they don't have any children. So she becomes essentially the head of the government and decides to support all of these women across the world coming up with this power, which she doesn't know when she first does it, but she finds out that her younger sister had been sold into sex trafficking at a young age and was living essentially in this den. That's the best way to put it. It's like dirt floor, bunch of women in there who were essentially sex slaves, and they'd be sold out. And so she was living there, and she was one of the oldest of the group of women in there. And they come to find out about the power because initially the people who are running this human trafficking ring are always bringing in young girls because, of course, the men want the younger girls. They want the more attractive, supple girls. And then they get this ruling, don't bring any more young girls in. So all the women in there are like, well, why are they not bringing girls in anymore? And then one young girl comes in because she looks slightly older than they think. And she has the power. She passes it on to them. They break out. They kill all the sex traffickers and whatever. And then they start essentially their own little mini country and start a revolt for women's rights in Moldova.
All right.
So as she's rising to power, Tatiana finds out that her sister is running this coup, essentially. And so the two kind of join forces and take over a country and reduce the political and social oppression of these women.
Wow.
So that's them in a nutshell, very, very nutshell. And then the last character is Tunde, who is the Nigerian journalist. And so Tunde really, really wants to be a journalist. His best friend, Nina, who he might have like a romantic relationship with. It's not clear. They play it up a lot more in the movie than they do in the book. But Nina finds out about the power and she wants to cover it. That is her story. So he's kind of tagging along, riding her coattails, find out about this story, and they go into a place where a bunch of women in Nigeria are using the power just among themselves, like at a party, like lighting light bulbs and like dancing to music and making sparks fly, having a good old time. But they sneak in, and the women hear people sneak in, and all they do is see Tunde. So they're like, oh gosh, these men are coming to get me. So they go to electrocute him, and Nina steps in front, and she gets blasted right in the face and almost dies, essentially. Like she's in rough shape. So she decides she doesn't want to do this work anymore. At first, she physically can't. She's so injured. She's in the hospital for a long time. But Tunde knows that this story is like breaking. He's got to get on it. So he essentially steals Nina's story. He goes to a Middle Eastern country where essentially these women are being told you can't use your power. And if you use it, then we are going to kill you. So again, all of this oppression of women, political oppression, physical oppression by women getting raped or beat or murdered because they have the power. And then it talks even about the oppression socially, like being fully covered and how the women are almost using that to advantage by like trying to hide that they use the sparks and things, even though we know that is also a religious garment as well. But, they're kind of using it. And the example is Tunde is watching all of these women, and there's suddenly this revolt because this woman was so severely beaten for just having the power. She wasn't even using it. She was like practicing with herself, wasn't hurting anybody. And these men and boys saw her doing it and they beat her like within an inch of her life. And then other men came along and they wouldn't let her leave the area to go to the hospital for treatment. And so all these women see this and they all band together, and it's a like tear-jerking scene where it's like literally like hundreds of women just like screaming like let her out, and then they put her in the back of a car and they walk her to the hospital like chanting for her.
Wow.
And it's so moving. And then the revolt continues. She gets treatment in the hospital, and now they're rolling out tanks and they want to shoot these women down and have, neutralized the problem. And this other scene, also very tear-jerking, this guy gets out of a tank and he's like about to shoot the machine gun. And his mother steps out of the crowd and she's like, don't you dare.
Wow.
She's like,
you
we just want to walk the streets and talk about how we feel. Like, do not shoot us. And then, of course, all these women, they try to electrocute the tank and like fight back. And she like yells at them. She's like, do not hurt them. Like, they're here on orders. Like, we all just want to say our part. Like, why can't we do this peacefully? So that's what happens with that. Tunde goes back home to Nigeria. He posts all about this story, becomes famous. CNN is calling him up and is like, dude, you got to work with us. So, of course, he's like, I'm going to do it. So then he wants to go to Moldova and find out about this uprising. And essentially, he's covering all of that. He's getting to know Tatiana. He's connecting her with her sister who's running the resistance. But you see that throughout it, Tunde's starting to question how and why women are using their power, because there are some women who are just using it just to kill all the men for no,
Right.
there's men who are innocent or who haven't done anything, and they're kind of going crazy with this power and just using it against everyone. And he starts to suffer from almost like PTSD of seeing all this violence, both against the women and then the violence that the women are perpetrating on other people. And so by the end of the movie, he basically is kind of going home, but it's alluded to like, well, he's going to go home for a little while and then he's going to cover the next story about it. The book goes on, and it basically, I'm not going to go into it because it's very long and very detailed, but the book essentially ends in almost like a post-apocalyptic society because the women use the power to shut down all technology. And so we all kind of have to start from scratch. And the book, it's really interesting the way it's written. The first chapter is essentially a man writing a letter saying to this woman, saying, hey, can you read my manuscript about how we got to where we're at? And this woman's like, okay. And then the last chapter, she's like, oh, well, your book's really good, but there's some parts of that are really unbelievable. Like, who would ever believe that men ever ran society?
Wow.
And like, why you got this Tunde guy in there? Like, why would this guy ever even like be allowed to like cover stories about us as women? And so again, there's this interesting role reversal about how things that we as women and girls have almost gotten normal. It's, almost gotten used to. It's almost normalized of this thought process about women can do, about what men can do. And then one last part about that I wanted to cover was in the movie, John Leguizamo plays Margot's husband, Jocelyn's dad, and he does an amazing job. I think he's a great actor, but he does an amazing job with showing, just really illustrating with like real emotion how that role reversal happens. And there's like lines in the show that he says that I feel like every woman has said. Like there's this one example where they're at some political party and Margot's working the room, with her drinks, and she looks gorgeous, and he's sitting at the bar and he's like crying. He's like, I haven't seen my wife in like months and all she cares about is this. And I'm just here to be her eye candy. But look how pretty she is. She's so pretty. And it's like, we've all been there where there's like where Margot comes home after an exhausting day and he's like, you never asked me how my day is. And it's like, he does it in such a way that's like, you understand where he's coming from, but it's also like, women feel like this all the time.
All the time, right? That's traditionally.
Yeah, traditionally. So that is the book, The Power, also the show. We don't know 100% if season 2 of the show is going to come out. It was just released in 2023. So it's been long enough that there is a possibility for season 2. But the way that the first season ends, it doesn't cover everything in the book. So if you read the book and then you're going to watch the show, just know it's going to kind of cut off at a certain point. I probably should have said spoiler alert before, sorry. But lots
of... If you're listening, we're talking about the content.
Yeah. So. Yes, that's true. And then lots of stuff to talk about. I'm not going to cover it all. There'll be links in the show notes. But I included a bunch of statistics about intimate partner violence. So that's what it was formerly called, domestic violence. We're just using that name now because the idea about domestic violence was, men beating women, where intimate partner violence we know can happen in all sorts of intimate partner relationships. There's links about statistics for that, statistics about human trafficking, and specifically violence against women and girls, which I think is really important just to know that you might think here in the US that we're doing pretty well, but the numbers may change your mind on that. And then just seeing the disparities worldwide and how severe it can be in other countries. I also included some notes from Amnesty International about social, political, financial, physical, and spiritual oppression of women. So things that may not be traditionally considered abusive, but are definitely keeping women from attaining their desires socially, politically, financially. Lest we all forget, women couldn't have a bank account in the United States until the 1970s, which is scary and terrifying. But it's happened here, folks, too. So, we're not immune. Hopefully, we're a little bit progressive than other countries, but there are definitely other countries that are ahead of us on that. I also put in a bunch of stuff about sterilization of women. Specifically, we know here in the US in the 60s and the 70s, there was a large movement to sterilize women with disabilities and mental illnesses. So that was something I feel like once it was officially stopped, kind of got swept under the rug, but it's part of our history. We were denying these women their basic bodily rights. I'm not going to go on a tangent on that, but we're still coping with some of that about how other people are making decisions about our reproductive rights. So it's not the first time it's happened, unfortunately.
Yeah.
One article that was really interesting, I just want to talk about for like 2 minutes, was there's this amazing article by the New York Times about women and rage, specifically how it is evidenced in television. And even recently, there's been more and more shows recently that are showing women embracing their anger, using their rage in ways that are not necessarily negative. You know, some of them are to empower themselves, to speak up for themselves. So some examples of recent shows that have been really popular that are talking a lot about women in rage go from, you know, being silly all the way to being serious. So I don't know, did you see She-Hulk
No.
on Disney? So She-Hulk is an actual comic about Jennifer Walters, who is the Hulk's cousin, and she gets his powers. But it's showing that in that show, she is an attorney, and nobody really takes her seriously as an attorney. But then when she hulks out, they're like, wait,
Oh.
listen. So that's like in a snapshot. There's way more to the show than that.
Right.
But there's that show. There is, if you watch, did you watch Beef? I only watched
No, I feel like I'm behind on things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of Jessica Jones. If you like, you know, going down the Marvel sci-fi route, as you know, I adore Jessica Jones, the Scarlet
Right.
Witch. There's a lot of, more recently, more of those female characters from comics, and a lot of these comics were written long, long ago. These are not brand new characters. These were written in the 60s and the 70s. So
I know, but then the guys are like, what are you trying to do? Putting all these women superheroes.
Yeah,
like,
where these
please.
are like Stan Lee. I will say, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. You know how much I love comics and Comic-Con, but Stan Lee was extremely progressive. A lot of his superheroes were of different ethnicities, different genders. He was doing this stuff way before anyone else did, and I think a lot of people don't realize how progressive it was for the time, and how he was really trying to shine a spotlight on, you know, it's not just the white dude who's really good at stuff. You know, there are other ways to have power and to show responsibility and things. Other big ones that have been out, if you watched Yellow Jackets, there's a lot about female rage in that. Of course, The Handmaid's Tale, which I bring that up because Naomi Alderman was a mentor of the writer of The Handmaid's Tale, of Margaret Atwood. And so she was really inspired by Margaret Atwood and her writings when she wrote the book that we just talked about.
Yeah,
So
I mean, Handmaid's Tale, for sure. I mean, hits a lot of current events and things along those lines. Did you read the books or just the show or both?
Not yet. I actually have the graphic novel that I was going to read. I've watched all of the show except for like half the most recent season.
Right.
And then just to bring it full circle back to me, because why not? One of the original characters that represented female rage in literature was Medusa. You know, if you know the whole story of Medusa, she was a Gorgon, which was a non-human, but she was more human presenting than her sisters. And she was worshiping in a temple, and she was raped in that temple, and she was punished by the goddess and turned into this demon with the snakes for hair. So she was being punished by another woman for something that was not her fault. And then Medusa goes on to turn all these men to stone, and it's coming from her anger and her rage at being, you know, cast down for something that wasn't her fault. She tried to fight what happened to her and was just constantly cast down. So Medusa is one of the OG female rage characters. I think resonates with a lot of people, and I was Medusa at Comic-Con, so that's why I said.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, and you know how sociology and psychology are so intertwined.
Yeah.
Was that part of some of your training, more like undergrad, more master's, more PhD? Like there's such, you know, connection there.
Yes and no. I mean, we definitely had to take a class undergrad, definitely had to take a class in sociology in the graduate program, but there are full fields of just looking at feminine psychology. And so I think just being aware that there are deeper studies in those areas, but if you're just going for a generalist degree, you're just going to, you know, touch on little parts, but it's definitely ingrained. And I think the other part of it is, it's not, as we get more into these issues, it's not so easy to suss out sociology and psychology. You know, we have this psychology of these things are happening, our minds are working this way because of our social environment, because of our social context.
Right. Wow. Yeah. More power to the women here.
Yeah.
Seriously, we make those men. We create them and birth them. Okay.
Oh, and the other thing I just wanted to touch really, just because I don't want people to think I'm like man hating, there are some really beautiful examples in the power of men as allies for women. Like Tunde is a good one, even though he has some problematic moments, but Margot's husband, he is an ally to her throughout, even though it's killing their marriage and destroying them. He loves his kids, and he loves his daughter, and even though this power is kind of ripping their family apart, he still loves them for who they are. And he's also, I forgot to say, he's a psychiatrist. So that's how he first comes to learn about it. Is a patient is brought to him who has this severe rage and all of these mental health issues, and she's only like 12 and been on these medications, and he's like, this isn't right, like we just need to talk to her, like she's mad about stuff. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be angry. And so he does a really nice job of showing how men are allies. We're not, against all of them.
No, of course not. There's good ones. I'm married to one, so
Yes,
I hope
thank
so.
goodness.
He's good. We're very equal partners in most respects, I would think. Wow. Yeah. Go women.
Yeah. I know it was a lot to unpack, so I just hit all the highlights.
So mine is going to be a little different than the typical, which is good, and it'll be fairly brief. So because we're on the women theme, mine also goes along with that. My cocktail is called Pink for a Cure cocktail. Honestly, I was just trying to find a women's health cocktail. It was really tricky, and pink we know represents, a lot of the women's health initiatives, specifically breast cancer. My topic isn't specifically that, but it is 1.5 ounces of light rum, 1/2 ounce of grenadine, put some maraschino cherries in there, pour some club soda over it, and throw on a sprig of mint. Very easy, light, and refreshing, not too strong. Basically, what I'm going to touch on are a few books that I find are really excellent resources for women's health, because health literacy in the country in general, but specifically for women, knowing and understanding their own bodies, their own health care, their own access to health care. There is a big disparity and problem there. And, these books and resources, and some of these people also have a social media presence, so I would recommend following them as well. So the first one is called It's Not Hysteria, Everything You Need to Know About Your Reproductive Health, But Were Never Told. And it's by Karen Tang. And she's a board-certified gynecologist and minimally invasive gynecologic surgeon. And she's known internationally as a leader in reproductive health. And, she has all the degrees to back it up. But she has also reached a lot of people through social media. And she is very active on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. She gives a lot of great factual and practical information. And she's very passionate about, period health, pelvic pain, reproductive rights. So, her book is essentially a guide to the female anatomy experience medical problems. I listened to the audiobook, but I actually would recommend if you can purchase a copy of it, it's something you can look back on and say, oh, I remember this topic. Let me find it here. Let me bring it when I go to see my doctor or my PARNP, and we can talk about it. And referring back and having like reference material, but it's written in a way that is very accessible to all people. So, some of the reasons she wrote this book, that up to 90% of women experience menstrual abnormalities or pelvic issues in their lifetime. And these conditions are pretty overwhelmingly misunderstood or misdiagnosed or dismissed. Root causes for these issues that she covers are things like PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, fibroids, ovarian cysts, PMDD, which is premenstrual dysmorphic disorder.
Dysphoric.
What?
Premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
Dysphoric. I said dysmorphic. Yes. Pelvic floor dysfunction. And a lot of these don't receive the funding for research, and new treatments are not necessarily available for these conditions, even though it affects half the population. Mm-hmm. So this Dr. Karen Tang basically is on a mission to transform how we engage with healthcare and how we understand our own bodies. So this book is like I said, a comprehensive guide to very common conditions. She goes over potential treatment options, and she even gives you things you can ask your provider, different treatment options. And it basically gives people the tools to take control of their own gynecologic health. We touched a little bit about the socio-political issues in women's health, reproductive health care, anywhere from abortion to gender affirming care are currently really under siege. And so now without the support, the onus falls on the patients to advocate for themselves. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we really do need these reliable sources to rely on to get the correct information and to be able to understand it and have these discussions with our healthcare providers.
Can you talk a little bit more about what gender affirming care is? Because I feel like a lot of people have heard the term, but maybe don't understand what it looks like in practical terms.
Yeah, I mean, so that's something that I really want to learn a little more about too, because I am starting to encounter patients who are going through these transitions in my regular practice. But essentially, gender affirming care is any care in a transgender individual to help them to, I can't use the word become, but to affirm the gender that they feel they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that typically involves hormones and sometimes surgery, dependent on what that person wants and what their options are. So it's not something I'm very well versed in, but I have had recently a few patients. And so I really want to support them and understand it. So I'm looking, actually, I have to get into some, continuing medical education, a conference, something that I can really, even if I'm not going to be prescribing it, I want to understand it so that I can understand these patients and what they're going through.
Yeah. And I would imagine that even if you're not the one in charge of, the hormone replacement or anything like that, it could affect other medical issues that they may be coming to see you for.
It can. And so what's interesting is I had to read up on this because so if you're a female to male transition, so you are a transgender male, you're receiving testosterone, the lab values are different between a person who's born female and a person who's born male. And I had to read up on which parameters am I using and at which point.
Yeah.
Because there are specific things like your hemoglobin and hematocrit, which are your red blood cell counts, are usually higher in males than females.
Mm-hmm.
Too high is not a good thing, and testosterone can make it go higher. So I had to read up on this, and the rule of thumb that I could find was that once they have ceased having menstrual periods, then you go by the male parameters. I think this is developing. I think this is still so new that we really need to just continue to learn and just be open to learning as providers what other things to look out for.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because when I see someone who's transgender for psychological evaluation, most of the norms do not include gender anymore, but there are some older norms or some specific neuropsych norms that are differentiated by gender. And so if I have someone who is in the process of transitioning or who maybe hasn't taken hormones but is preferring to be called the gender that is not their biological birth gender, sometimes I'll run both of the norms to just kind of give them a sense of where they're at. And then it gets much more complicated, like as you said, once they start taking hormones. Sometimes I'll run just the gender for whatever hormone they are. So if it's a male to female transition, but they've been on hormones for several years, then I'll just run the norms for females. But for psychology, it's much harder to suss out that difference because do you really lose some of the other things that might be coming up on psychological testing just because you're taking hormones? Or how would they look differently when you're taking hormones?
Well,
because
and
those
also
norms have nothing to do with hormone replacement. You know what I mean?
Also because if you've been raised part of your life in one way, that's
yes.
going to affect you.
So usually I'll do both norms for people just so they have a sense of what's going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, Dr. Karen Tang's book is very open to discussing those things and discussing, like I said, all of these, just downright to what is a hysterectomy? Mm-hmm. Because I'll often have patients come in like, yeah, I had a total hysterectomy. I'm like, okay, so did you have your ovaries removed? Yeah, I think they took everything. Well, do we think or do we know?
Yeah.
So
hysterectomy, that's the crazy part, not knowing what you had removed from your body because nobody told you.
Right. Or yeah, it wasn't explained thoroughly to you. So hysterectomy is removal of the uterus. Total hysterectomy is removal of the uterus along with the cervix. Partial is the uterus being taken, but the cervix being left. Ovaries are a separate procedure called an oophorectomy. So often they go together, but they do not always go together. So that is very, very important. Knowing if you need to have continued pelvic exams, if you have to have continued pap smears, what are we looking at here? What do we have? And it's very common. And hopefully newer generations I think hopefully we've had better sex education and biology classes growing up. Hopefully now medical providers are explaining things better. But
I think
certainly
generation too, they're more thoughtful about asking. There's less, I wouldn't say less shame about asking, but they're more open to asking those questions than maybe other generations or older folks who, were told not to talk about it, just say yes to the doctor.
Yeah. So, it's about taking control, understanding your body, and hopefully, more research will be done, not just on female genitalia or female organ type disorders, but other organ systems which do act differently in females than males, bone health, cardiovascular health, of course, mental health, so it's interesting. And like I said, having good resources to refer to is really important. The next book I listened to as well. It's someone who I came across on social media, but it's a Dr. Jen Gunter. She's actually written at least 2 books, possibly more. The one that I did because I wanted to learn more about menopause is called the Menopause Manifesto, Own Your Health with Facts and Feminism. She's also written the Vagina Bible, which I did not listen to. I'm going to assume that covers similar content to It's Not Hysteria by Dr. Kang, so I didn't want to overlap too much. But basically, again, she's somebody who is a fearless advocate for women, and she tries to combat myths and misunderstandings about menopause, and she uses facts and science and even some historical perspective to go through everything. I will say that this book does at some parts read a little more like a textbook, but so I listened to it, but I would have liked actually, again, to own a copy to go back, especially about the hormone therapy for menopause, because she goes into a lot of detail and types and doses. And I'd like that as a reference, just even though, again, I'm not prescribing it because I don't specialize in that. I could, but I don't. So that I could understand it a little more, because I was even under some of the same myths that, there was a big time in the 80s and 90s where every single woman got what we called at the time hormone replacement therapy. Now they call it medical hormone therapy. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of fell out of favor because of risks of blood clots, breast cancer, things like that. But she actually explains that what those risks and benefits are and what the actual statistics are. And we're talking about 1 in 10,000 or something along those lines. But it does prevent your fractures and it does help with your symptoms. So it helped me to really understand, because it wasn't in my direct something I'm dealing with every day, but I was even like, patients probably don't need it. I mean, I'm not in menopause yet, so maybe I would be like, no, we really do need it when I physically felt it myself. Right. But it is sort of dismissive where we say it's normal, it's natural, it's fine.
Well, it's funny you say that, because would you be the same if you were working with a male patient? He was saying he was having some sort of prostate or testicular issue. You don't know what that feels like, but you would maybe not be as hesitant to recommend things.
Yes and no. I guess it's the hormone replacement part of things. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it is. There's a lot of cultural, societal, and misinformation that was out there. So she goes very detailed through what she calls the menopause transition, which is the time leading up to, and basically, explains that, yes, it's not a disease. It is a normal change like puberty, but, we should be educated on it, understand what symptoms are normal or typical or not. She goes into things like, what is perimenopause? What are hot flashes, sleep disruption, effects on your sex and libido, depression and mood changes, skin and hair issues. She talks about outdated therapies. She touches on breast health. She also talks a lot about diet, weight and muscle mass, bone health, and remembering to continue with your health maintenance screening. So, again, it's a really great resource. It's something that we can get solid evidence, because lately I've had, because of, I think, social media, specifically probably TikTok, people coming in, well, I want to check my hormones. Mm-hmm. So both Dr. Tang and Dr. Gunter go into that doesn't really help us. That doesn't, your hormones flux throughout your cycle, your hormones flux throughout your life. That doesn't do anything or treat anything. We treat the symptoms based on the symptoms and where you are in menopause or not menopause. Mm-hmm. So me telling you, okay, like the definition of menopause is really no period for a year, right? Mm-hmm. That's the definition. So, and usually if you've gone 6 months without one, you're pretty much there. We don't need the hormones to tell us that. Right. We go by your clinical symptoms. And then if you are having hot flashes or vaginal dryness or mood changes, then we address those. We don't need the hormones. But there was this big thing online lately. We're telling women that, doctors aren't telling you that you need to have your hormones regulated and all these things. And like, no, we're open to it. We're open to understanding and discussing, but we don't have to check your hormones to do that. So both these books definitely touch on that as well. And like I said, just having solid evidence-based, really experience, not some chick who, decided that she wanted to sell you some vitamins, telling you about your health. Mm-hmm. Go to a good resource. And not every medical provider is going to be a good resource.
Yeah.
There's good and bad.
What's the difference then between someone who may have like a clinical hormone imbalance? Like, are those different symptoms and you'd be checking for that then? Or is it kind of the same?
Hormones is a very general term too. Yeah. So insulin's a hormone. Thyroid, hormone is a hormone.
That's what I said before. Like hormones are all through our body. So
right. We're talking about testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, FSH, LH. These are the ones that we're talking about that are the typical female hormones, prolactin. PCOS is the polycystic ovarian is one thing that we will sometimes check because we're looking, there's a ratio between your FSH and your LH and some other things like sex hormone binding globulin and testosterone that can be off from typical.
Right, but you'd probably have other symptoms first before checking that.
Yeah, you're going to only check it because you're correlating it with symptoms. And there are criteria that can be met without ever checking labs. You can have an ultrasound that shows a very typical thing with hirsutism, which is hair growth, and glucose intolerance and prediabetes. So you can have all that and hit criteria without me ever checking labs, but you might want that to support it, or you might need that to hit criteria. Yeah. That's the one that comes to mind. Infertility, so primary infertility, secondary infertility, you may have some labs checked just to see where things are up and down during your cycle. Mm-hmm. So those would be, I guess, hormone abnormalities or imbalances. But there's not much more that would be considered that. There's other things they go into, fibroids and endometriosis, like we talked about, and adenomyosis, and all these other things that can affect your menstrual cycle, can affect the way you feel, but they aren't necessarily hormone imbalances, right, if that makes sense. So it's all about just knowing, understanding your body, understanding your organs, understanding the maintenance of a female body, and empowering yourself to be a partner in your own healthcare. And so I mentioned this to you before we had this topic, but there's this other book that I bought, actually the hard copy of this one. I did not reread it, but I read it back in the 90s, called Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is basically the first of its kind. It was published originally in 1970, has been updated. I think the most recent one is 2017, if I'm not, it's either 2011 or 2017 was the last update. But it's a giant, thick, nice, big book, pictures, everything. But it was it's made by the Boston Women's Health Book Collective. I'm going to link their website on there as well. But basically, it covers women's health, sexuality, sexual health, sexual orientation, gender identity, birth control, abortion, pregnancy, childbirth, violence and abuse, and menopause. And my one aunt, who, shout out to Aunt Dodie, who's now no longer with us, but she was like the original hippie, say anything aunt. And she gave me this book. My mother probably never even looked at what it was. It was a book. And it was empowering for me to be able to read on these things that maybe at that time in the 90s were considered taboo. Yeah. Me reading about, sexual orientation, reading about things like masturbation, reading about things like understanding birth control and STDs, and maybe some of it we were taught in school, but it felt good to have that physical resource that I could read and understand. And I guess, especially because I am a reader, book, knowledge, logic oriented person, it really helped. But I find that this book is timeless. I mean, hopefully they'll even do further updates. That, like I said, that Boston Women's Health Book Collective still exists. They have a website.
They have one specific to menopause. Our Bodies, Ourselves, Menopause. I just looked it up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a great, like, and like I said, of the time, the 70s, like, I just really like that. So I bought a copy that I will, when my children are the appropriate age, let them have it to read, like something concrete that they don't need to feel strange asking me. Like, yes, I'll speak to them, but I want them to have the ability to get information on their own when they need it.
Yeah.
So, and a good source, again, not, some chick trying to sell you something strange on TikTok. So, lastly, basically, we're talking about health literacy. That's what we're talking about here. The understanding of information that has to do with your own health. They say that like 90 million Americans have difficulty understanding and acting upon their health information. Low health literacy can be linked to poor outcomes, emergency room visits, hospitalizations, poor overall health status, higher mortality. So, it's interesting now that they're starting to do studies and look specifically at health literacy for women's reproductive health.
Yeah.
And
It's
they
funny
are
you say that because before we recorded, we had talked about a particular article that might come up on a future podcast maybe, but some of the comments on this article were like, well, why do I have to do this? Shouldn't the doctors know this? Like, yeah, but it's your body. Like, yes, the doctors
right.
should know, your basic medical records or what these things in your medical records mean, but for your own understanding of who you are and yourself, you should know this information too. It's not just for a professional, it's for everyone.
Right. So we should understand our own bodies and be able to discuss that. So now they're starting to try and integrate this into the training. So ACOG, which is the American Congress of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, has put out some guidelines on how specifically to help with health literacy in our patients, making sure that you're tailoring and speaking to the skills of your individual patient, the way you speak, the way you organize your information, the way you ask open-ended questions. And then checking for understanding, make sure the patient can repeat back to you, making sure that, you're tailoring what you're explaining to the specific person, giving them written materials that are specific to typically, I think they said grade level 7. I'm not positive, but they want it to be something that most people will be able to read and understand.
Yeah, most things that are supposed to be accessible to everyone should be grade 4, but
Is
I
it
think
4?
medical stuff might have to be a little bit higher.
Yeah. So, and then I came across an article which really hits home, and they were talking, it's about this author. What was her name? Rena Raphael. She's a wellness and women's health reporter. And she basically said that wellness has become an aspirational lifestyle and has been basically targeted at women, this wellness industry, and sort of spreading a lot of misinformation. Big one that we talk about is Gwyneth Paltrow, who
Goop? What are you talking about?
Yep,
He knows
founded
exactly what she's
Goop.
talking about. Her vagina's
And
a candle.
right. And there's a lot of fear mongering. There's a lot of harmful information. So we want to improve access to accurate information because women are unfortunately, it's hard when you have all this information to piece out what's right and what's not. But we have to be very careful with buying into some of these alternative medicine companies. They don't have your best interest at heart. They're trying to make a buck just like everybody else. I think they market themselves as, we're doing this for you because the medical system is corrupt, but whether you're making a buck, and you're selling things that might be harmful.
Well, and the other thing too, like with Goop or with any of these other places, is these are things that are targeted to a very specific population. So look, I love me some Gwyneth. I've never bought anything from Goop because it's too expensive. So it's not targeted to my demographic. But there is a demographic out there who it is targeted to, and it's great for them, but also understanding what is good for my health, what is, I don't know, what is something that is FDA approved, all of that stuff. Doing your own research on that stuff as well, not just buying it because it's sold by a celebrity.
Exactly. And we have to understand, remember, supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So you should always discuss with your medical provider. There might be supplements that we may say are okay, but there's a lot of unknowns with supplements and they could be dangerous. And likely, this is what I tell my patients when they come in with some expensive thing, this is supposed to regulate my hormones, or this is supposed to fix my sugar. Does this work? And I said, if it worked, the pharmaceutical companies would be selling it. Yeah. Not, you know what I mean? This lower tier
or nobody
MLM
would be
company.
It if it worked, they'd be keeping it secret. So.
Right. I mean, so again, it's about let's make more accessible, accurate information specifically to women's health. Let's stop targeting women with these charlatans selling random stuff. And as providers, let's communicate with our patients, guide them through this, give them the resources they need. And, hopefully in the end, women's health, like we said, it's not just about our female organs. It's about heart disease being the largest killer of women. And, there's other things out there, hip fractures being the downfall of many patients. It's not just about the female organs. There's a lot of women's health care that we need to educate our patients on. And as women, we need to advocate for better information and better research.
Yeah.
So,
and advocate that all this is real. I mean, I don't know if you saw it recently, so semi-tangent, but not really. So did you know that Courtney Cox was the first actress to say menstruation and period on television?
I feel like I came across that somewhere recently.
Yeah, so she did.
Did I see like something online?
Yes, because it did happen this past week. So she was the first actress to use menstruation and period in a Tampax commercial. It was like one of her very first jobs, and she was like, "Sure, I'll just go for it." Well, recently, I think within like the last couple of weeks, she redid her original commercial, reshot it, but talking about menopause, taking out menstruation and periods and talking about menopause. And it was just so relatable because it was like she kind of ushered in this conversation, years and years ago to talk about periods and all that good stuff. And now she's trying to get us to talk more about menopause. I was like, wow, she's coming full circle. Good job, Courtney.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, yeah, including it in normalizing it in TV shows, movies. We shouldn't be afraid to say the word period, menstruation, tampon, pad. It's like a normal thing, and not being afraid to speak about it. So,
there's so many women's health issues people are still afraid to speak about. Miscarriage,
Oh yeah. Fertility.
Yeah, fertility.
Well, fertility's gotten more out there, but still. Yeah. I mean, and so even I, as a parent, I grew up in those times still where it was awkward. And so I struggle with trying to be more open, but in my own way of communicating, we just try and make these part of casual conversations if we can. I just
heard a tiny voice, "Oh, Mom, stop trying to be woke." She probably doesn't talk like that, but
no, but I'm sure there's some random preteen phrases happening.
Yeah. Don't try to have the Riz. Okay?
Oh God. Yeah. I said Riz to my husband because I was like, it was a meme and it was like the Riz that we knew and it was Rizzo from the Muppets. And he's like, I get the picture, but what is Riz? I'm like, oh, sorry.
Never mind.
So that's it. That's what I got for us.
That was great.
Yeah. Women's health. Let's rally
women's
more power to the
health.
women.
Yes.
Let's get our superpowers.
I know. Well, I think of it this way. The more that we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more we hear and listen to each other, the better it's going to be. So it starts with us.
Yeah, it does. So, again, it's us Gen Xers. We just like straddle like all generations and we're going to change the world. All right.
I really hope so. It's like, what else are we here for? I mean, we had some killer music that still are bangers in the club.
I have to tell you, I mean, I was listening on XM to Pop Rocks today and it was whenever I was driving around, it was all like unplugged versions of stuff and every single song I could sing the lyrics.
Well, I don't remember where I was. I was somewhere though, and it was like basically like our senior year high school playlist. And I was like, these songs still track. They're still bangers. They're still good.
Seriously. So this is again offshoot of random things, but Badass Women, the Cranberries, Zombie.
Yes.
You know that song?
Yes, of course.
So my one child is a gymnast, is looking at that song, an instrumental version, as possible music for next year. And I was like, oh yeah, I raised you right. So, all right. I think we've been successful. It's a long day of recording, but we did it.
We did it.
And we drank 2 cocktails. I didn't drink the second one that much because
I drank about half of each one, or else I'd be toasted right now. You guys would know if I drank them both.
All right. So thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.